Now, with the gap in election polls razor thin, both Republicans and Democrats have been prepping legal strategies to help them get the result they want. Let's take a look at what their lawyers have been up to and how it might affect the results.
Working for every vote. But in the battleground state of Michigan, it hasn't just been about getting voters to the polls that matters this year. There's also a fight to legally define which votes count after the ballots are cast. Across Michigan and other swing states, Republicans and allied groups have filed well over 100 lawsuits to limit the number of votes that can be counted. They say that's necessary to fight election fraud. Trump's allies falsely claimed that his loss to Joe Biden in 2020 was due to voter fraud. But courts rejected over 60 lawsuits filed by Republican allied lawyers after the election. Many of the suits cited conspiracy theories, and some of the lawyers involved, including former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani, lost their legal licenses afterwards. But it's clear why so many Republicans have been pursuing this strategy. With a closely divided electorate in the swing states, getting some ballots disqualified could swing the election. Let's take a look at the Republican strategy in 3 key states: Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Arizona. In Michigan, the Republicans have targeted voter registration efforts. They've tried to disqualify mobile voting sites like vans meant to make it easier for voters in underserved areas to cast a ballot. And they've worked to tighten restrictions on mail-in ballots. Similar efforts are underway in Pennsylvania, with Republican lawsuits challenging mail voting rules and the ability of voters to correct mistakes on their ballots, for instance, filling in the wrong date. In Arizona, the Republicans have filed one of their most aggressive challenges, arguing that courts should be able to toss out election results if irregularities are detected. Those irregularities cover so many possibilities that a potentially huge number of votes could be disqualified. Democratic campaign lawyers are fighting or have promised to fight each of these suits. Challenges to those rulings could send one or more cases all the way to the Supreme Court, which has 3 members appointed by Republican candidate Donald Trump, and has favored him in recent decisions. And that could mean that the results of the election won't be known for some time. Meanwhile, over the past 4 years, the Republican legal strategy has convinced many in their base and beyond that the voting system is fundamentally corrupt. Trump himself has threatened to jail election officials, as well as political opponents, if he wins. And if he loses, he said he won't accept the results. That's a road America has been down before, on January 6th, 2021. But this time around, it could lead somewhere different.
And for more on this, I am joined by Brett Schafer, who's joining me from Washington, D.C. He is a senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund's Alliance for Securing Democracy. He specializes in disinformation and authoritarian interference. Welcome to DW, Brett. It's good to have you. So we've just seen in our report the legal efforts by the Republican Party in battleground states to prevent, quote, voter fraud. Now, the courts rejected no less than 60 of these claims after the 2020 election. Why do so many Americans still not trust the election system?
Yeah, I think it really comes from the top of the ticket. And we've seen this messaging now, not just for 4 years, but really for 8 years. And so there's been a sort of snowball effect of casting doubt on the legitimacy of elections and casting doubt on the process. And so in some ways, you kind of can't unring that bell at this point. So it's very much embedded in at least part of the GOP strategy to cast doubt about the processes, to cast doubt about the legitimacy of elections, and obviously to tee up some legal challenges in case Tuesday doesn't go the way that they hope.
So, Brett, just perhaps maybe underscore that with some of the evidence you've seen that there is indeed, as you're putting it, a deliberate effort to undermine faith in the election system in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it obviously from certain parts of the GOP and the Trump campaign, but there's also been a bit of a cottage industry that has popped up over the past 4 years around election integrity or so-called election integrity efforts. So these are people outside of the campaigns who have gone state by state, sort of ginning up conspiracies about widespread voter fraud, about non-citizens voting in mass, about problems with machines flipping ballots, problems with mail-in voting. And so all of these things have just picked up momentum over time. So the narratives that we're seeing right now, these have been constants now for 4 years. We're not seeing much different. The difference is a much greater percentage of Americans are skeptical about elections and how they're administered than they were even 4 years ago.
From everything else you've observed pertaining to disinformation, who's pushing the disinformation in this election? Is it coming from both sides, the Republicans and the Democrats, and some of the external sources?
This is largely domestically driven, unfortunately. When we look at social media, when we look at the key influencers around casting doubt related to the election, these are coming from known Americans. That said, our foreign adversaries have also weaponized these debates. So we have seen Russian-linked actors in the past couple weeks spreading false accusations around voter fraud, including putting out 2 videos that are entirely fabricated. One in Pennsylvania that appeared to show election workers ripping up ballots, another one in Georgia where they said Haitian immigrants were voting in the election. These things were not true. They were entirely made up. The intelligence community has linked it to Russia. So Russia takes its cues from Americans. They're very parasitic in their disinformation. So when they see that this is clearly a divisive issue, they latch onto it, they help to amplify it, and in some cases, they're actually generating some of this disinformation.
Brett, in your work, you distinguish between 3 periods when false or misleading information can have an effect. You say before the election, the day of, and after the election. Tell us what you're worried about most and why.
We're worried about the after period. So we're actually already in the election period because with early voting, so many Americans have already cast their ballot. We've already seen the information environment shift. So before the election, we see attacks on candidates, we see attacks on political parties, on their policies. During the election, we see attacks on the process. And so we're already in that period. Obviously, Tuesday is the big day, but millions and millions of Americans have already voted. So we're already seeing the kind of disinformation that is attacking the process. But it really is the period after we're very, very concerned about. Obviously, January 6th, has led to this sort of long-standing mistrust of the results. So we're really concerned about what we're going to see after Tuesday when the votes are counting, when we're going to see a spike in disinformation about the election itself.
You mentioned January 6th. My next question was really going to be if you think that there is a potential for violence, the kind of which we saw on January 6th, 2021.
Unfortunately, I do think there is the potential for that. I hope that there isn't. I hope we're not going to see that again, obviously. But I think clearly there is the potential for that to happen. I mean, the groundwork has been laid. I think the difference now is that law enforcement is not going to be caught flat-footed. I don't think anyone really expected what happened on January 6th to happen. And now people are prepared for it. So there's been much better preparation this time around. Election officials are much better prepared to communicate out results, to deal with mis and disinformation locally. And I think at the federal level, law enforcement is far better prepared for the kind of political violence that we saw on January 6th. But again, I hope it doesn't happen this time.
Yeah, and just perhaps maybe quickly bringing us to a close, Brett, how confident are you that this presidential election will reflect the will of the people?
I'm very confident. And we've done a lot of work over the past 6 months, over the past actually 4 years, working with election officials. These are very dedicated individuals from both the left and the right. I mean, I think one of the things that's really unfortunate is a lot of the people who've been caught up in these conspiracy theories, who've been attacked, who've had their families threatened, they're Republicans who are doing their job. And election officials, I have full trust in them. And again, if there are issues, there are legal processes to go through. There are always lawsuits. So there are ways to challenge this. But I trust that election officials are going to do it right. The count's going to be accurate. And we're going to know the true winner. Maybe not on Wednesday, but at least in a week or so.
All right, that is Brett Schafer from the German Marshall Fund's Alliance for Securing Democracy. We appreciate your time. Thank you, Brett.
Thank you.